Hi, Mr. President. Nice to meet you.
Richard Nixon from Yorba Linda to the world stage. Early life, a beginning in Yorba Linda. Richard Milhouse Nixon was born on January 9, 1913, on a small family citrus farm in Yorba Linda, California. His parents, Francis and Hannah Nixon, raised him in a hardworking Quaker household. Life was modest and often difficult, shaping Nixon's discipline, resilience, and ambition. He excelled academically, eventually attending Whittier College and earning a law degree from Duke University. World War II and entry into politics. During World War II, Nixon served in the U.S. Navy, rising to the rank of commander. After the war, he entered politics, winning a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1946, then the U.S. Senate in 1950. His fierce anti-communist stance made him a national figure. United States Vice President of the United States, 1953 to 1961. In 1953, Nixon became the 36th Vice President, serving under President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He traveled widely, debated Soviet Premier Khrushchev in the famous kitchen debate, and became known for his toughness and foreign policy skill. 37th President of the United States, 1969 to 1974. Nixon won the presidency in 1968 and again in 1972. His presidency was one of the most consequential in American history. Major achievements: ended U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Opened diplomatic relations with China, a historic breakthrough. Advanced détente with the Soviet Union. Oversaw the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969. Created the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and OSHA. These accomplishments reshaped global politics and American society. Watergate and resignation. Nixon's presidency collapsed under the weight of the Watergate scandal, involving a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters and a subsequent cover-up. After the Supreme Court ordered him to release Oval Office tapes that implicated him, Nixon became the first and only U.S. president to resign, stepping down on August 9, 1974. He was succeeded by Gerald Ford, who later pardoned him. Richard Nixon in the Vietnam War. When Richard Nixon became president in 1969, the Vietnam War had already been going on for years. He inherited a deeply unpopular conflict and promised to achieve peace with honor. His actions shaped the final years of the war. Below is a structured breakdown of what he actually did. 1. Vietnamization, his signature policy. Nixon introduced Vietnamization, a strategy to withdraw U.S. troops and shift the fighting to the South Vietnamese Army, ARVN. According to historical sources, the U.S. began reducing combat troops starting in 1969. The goal was to train, equip, and expand South Vietnam's forces so they could fight without American ground troops. This was meant to end U.S. involvement while avoiding a total collapse of South Vietnam. Bomb 2. Expanded the war into Cambodia and Laos. Even while withdrawing troops, Nixon expanded bombing and ground operations. Ordered secret B-52 bombings of North Vietnamese bases in Cambodia, menu bombings. Launched invasions of Cambodia, 1970, and operations in Laos, 1971, to destroy enemy supply routes. These actions were controversial and triggered massive protests in the U.S., including the tragic Kent State shootings in 1970. 3. Negotiated peace with North Vietnam. Nixon and his national security advisor Henry Kissinger held secret negotiations with North Vietnam's Le Duc Tho. Key points. Public peace talks in Paris went nowhere. Private talks eventually produced the Paris Peace Accords, 1973. Kissinger famously said, "Peace is at hand," in late 1972. The agreement led to a ceasefire. Return of U.S. prisoners of war. Withdrawal of all remaining U.S. forces. 4. Massive bombing campaigns. To pressure North Vietnam during negotiations, Nixon ordered resumed bombing of North Vietnam, paused under Johnson. The intense Christmas bombings of December 1972, 11 days of bombing Hanoi and Haiphong. This helped push both sides back to the negotiating table. 5. Final withdrawal of U.S. troops. By early 1973, the U.S. military had largely left Vietnam. The last American combat troops departed in March 1973. Nixon declared the war effectively over for the U.S. However, South Vietnam remained dependent on U.S. support and eventually fell in 1975, 2 years after Nixon resigned. When Richard Nixon became president in 1969, the Cold War was tense and dangerous. The US and the Soviet Union had thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at each other. Nixon believed the world needed an era of negotiation, not constant confrontation. His work with the Soviet Union became one of the most important parts of his presidency. 1. Détente, easing Cold War tensions. Nixon launched a policy called détente, meaning relaxation of tensions. According to Britannica, it was a period of increased cooperation and reduced hostility between the US and the Soviet Union. It included trade, diplomacy, and arms control agreements. Nixon's visit to China pushed the Soviets to negotiate more openly with the US. This was a major shift from decades of Cold War hostility. 2. The 1972 Moscow Summit, a breakthrough. In May 1972, Nixon became the first U.S. president to visit Moscow. He met with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev and signed several historic agreements. The most important ones. SALT-I, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. The first major nuclear arms control treaty in history. Froze the number of intercontinental ballistic missile (ICBM) launchers on both sides. Slowed the nuclear arms race. ABM Treaty, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Limited both nations to 2 anti-missile defense sites, each with only 100 missiles. Prevented a dangerous missile defense arms race. Considered a cornerstone of Cold War stability. Incidents at Sea Agreement. Reduced the risk of accidental naval clashes between U.S. and Soviet ships. Environmental Protection Agreement. Cooperation on pollution, science, and environmental research. Apollo-Soyuz Space Cooperation Agreement. Paved the way for the 1975 Apollo-Soyuz test project, the first joint U.S. Soviet space mission. These agreements marked a dramatic improvement in relations. 3. Long-term peace declaration. At the end of the summit, Nixon and Brezhnev signed a joint declaration promising to avoid military confrontation, to continue arms control, to work toward long-term peace. This was a symbolic but powerful statement during the Cold War. Apollo 11 launched on July 16, 1969, just 6 months after Richard Nixon became president. Although the moon landing program was created under Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy, Nixon played a major role in the public, political, and ceremonial side of the mission. 1. Nixon made the most historic phone call ever made. According to the U.S. National Archives, Nixon spoke live to Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin while they were standing on the moon. He told them, "This certainly has to be the most historic phone call ever made from the White House." This moment became one of the most iconic presidential communications in history. 2. He personally welcomed the astronauts home. 3 days after the moon landing, Nixon flew to the USS Hornet in the Pacific Ocean to greet Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins after splashdown. He met them while they were inside the quarantine module. He congratulated them on behalf of the nation. This became a major global broadcast event. His presence turned the recovery into a moment of national celebration. 3. He continued supporting the Apollo program. According to Apollo11space.com, Nixon provided political and financial backing to keep the Apollo missions going after Apollo 11's success. He supported continued moon missions, Apollo 12 to 17. Promoted public enthusiasm for space exploration. Preserved lunar artifacts and samples through new policies. 4. He used Apollo 11 to strengthen America's global image. The moon landing happened during the Cold War. Nixon used the success to boost U.S. prestige. Show technological leadership over the Soviet Union. Promote American unity during a time of Vietnam War tension. This was a major diplomatic victory. Richard Nixon's First Lady was Pat Nixon, born Thelma Catherine Pat Ryan. Her served as First Lady of the United States from 1969 to 1974, during Nixon's presidency. Her was known for her warmth, global diplomacy, and tireless public service. Early life. Born March 16, 1912, in Ely, Nevada. Grew up in Artesia, California. Lost both parents by age 18 and worked multiple jobs to support herself and pay for school. Graduated from the University of Southern California with honors. Her resilience shaped her lifelong commitment to helping others. Marriage to Richard Nixon. Met Richard Nixon in 1937 while acting in a community theater group. Married in 1940. Had 2 daughters, Tricia and Julie. Her campaigned with Nixon from the very beginning, earning the nickname, the Nixon Team. United States role as First Lady, 1969 to 1974. Pat Nixon transformed the role in several ways. 1. The most traveled First Lady. Her visited over 75 countries, more than any First Lady before her. Her accompanied Nixon on historic trips to China and the Soviet Union, becoming the first First Lady to visit both. 2. The People's First Lady. She worked to make the White House more open and welcoming. Expanded public tours. Added sign language and multilingual tours. Invited people from all backgrounds, including the elderly and disabled. 3. Historic White House improvements. Her added over 600 pieces of art and furnishings to the White House collection, more than any First Lady in history. 4. Humanitarian work. Pat Nixon promoted volunteerism, disaster relief, goodwill missions abroad. Her visited a combat zone, becoming the first First Lady to do so. 1980s, Nixon returned to global influence. Nixon slowly re-entered public life. He traveled abroad, including a return trip to China in 1976, where he was warmly received despite Watergate. Throughout the 1980s, he advised presidents privately. Wrote several books on foreign policy. Became respected internationally as a strategic thinker. Even critics admitted he had a brilliant mind for geopolitics. 1990, Nixon Library opens in Yorba Linda. In 1990, the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum opened on the site of his birthplace in Yorba Linda, California. It includes his childhood home, his presidential helicopter, exhibits on his life, career, and foreign policy, the grave sites of Richard and Pat Nixon. This became a major part of his legacy. 1994, final years. Nixon remained active in writing and foreign policy commentary until his final days. He passed away on April 22, 1994, at age 81, after suffering a stroke. He was buried at the Nixon Library beside his wife Pat. Rose Garden at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. The Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum in Yorba Linda features a beautifully maintained rose garden located on the museum grounds. It's one of the most photographed and peaceful areas of the entire property. What you'll find in the rose garden: A large collection of classic and modern rose varieties. Beautifully landscaped walkways. Benches and shaded spots for relaxing. A clear view of the Nixon family home and the presidential helicopter, Marine One, nearby. A popular location for weddings, portraits, and quiet reflection. The Rose Garden is inside the grounds of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum, so you'll see it when you visit the museum. Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. Address: Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. 18001, Yorba Linda Boulevard, Yorba Linda, California, 92886. Ticket prices. From the Nixon Foundation's official ticket information. General admission $29. Seniors, 62 plus, $25. College students, with ID, $23. Retired/military, $23. Active military is free. Youth, 12 to 17, $23. Children, 5 to 11, $19. Children under $5. Tickets include access to the permanent galleries, Nixon's birthplace home, the Oval Office replica, Marine One presidential helicopter, the gardens and grounds. Hours: open daily, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Closed on Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, New Year's Day.
If you walked into the Oval Office, this is how it would have looked.
Wow.
It's George Washington.
Oh, the
Before
first
he was
president.
He was only 44 years old. He was a general then. That was pre-president George Washington.
Okay.
Not every president has George Washington above the mantle, but many did. And currently, if you walked into the Oval Office today, that same portrait is right there. But different presidents can decorate the room the way they want. They can have different presidential portraits on the wall. It's all their personal taste,
Okay.
personal preference.
This is
If
really
you were
nice.
lucky enough to be had the opportunity to meet with the president, you would likely come through that door. That's the president's secretary's door.
That one? Wow.
There and be introduced to the president. This is out to the Rose Garden, which very often you'll see presidents of the United States go out and do ceremonies or events out at the Rose Garden. That leads right there. That, in the real Oval Office, that would lead to the president's private office, private study. Here it's going to take you to Vietnam. And this is a replica of the desk that both Presidents Nixon and President Ford used in the Oval Office. And you're welcome to try out the chair, and if I can help you with a picture, let me know.
Oh, thank you.
What is that on top? Is that a light or?
It's this is the
Microphone?
lens, and then they can turn around and built-in microphone. This is really nice camera. Like I can take either a picture and video,
Oh.
and then also they can turn around to me. So
Oh.
like 3 times kick.
Oh wow. Huh.
Yeah. Also the built-in battery to plug into. Okay. Hi. Sit here. Matt. I grab a phone a little bit. Hi, Mr. President. Nice to meet you. Wow. This is incredible. I didn't know you have like such a great here in Orange County.
Wow. Well, you do a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of the library.
Thank you.
You know about Elvis Presley?
Oh yes, I know.
Elvis Presley came to meet President Nixon, and they posed for a picture right over here. And not the next room, but the room after. You're going to see the picture, a big blow up of the picture of President Nixon and Elvis Presley. But just this is where they were standing when they posed.
Awesome. That's so neat.
Yeah, that was 1970.
Nixon and Humphrey are separated by about 375 thousandths of 1%. As it turned out, in the late tired hours of last night, or the early tired hours
That's a picture of Lincoln.
I would stop in this room because I just sort of gathered strength just from being in this room. We're liking it.
Vietnam moratorium has been postponed.
We had demonstrations, thousands of them. So under the circumstances, I knew it was necessary to address the nation as a president.
He have a film about the movie Hollywood Nixon.
Voice of America was a sign of joy. And that sustained.
Who is Nixon?
That's how it was from the past. I had been sustained. I could call it a note right after Watergate first broke. And it read, I am courageous, so I'm not slain. I shall lay me down and free you out. And I shall rise at a day. That's the story of my life.
When Nixon was a young boy, his little brother died. When Nixon was 18 or 19, his older brother, Harold, died.
Dick just picked up the mantle at that point, and he was.
People hoped that he'd be able to do it. The problem, of course, was how to do it.
Edmund Kennett.
หลังจากออกจากโรงหนังนะคะเป็นโรงหนังชีวประวัติของอดีตประธานาธิบดีนิกสันนะเราก็จะเข้าไปในส่วนของแกลเลอรี่ด้านใน